Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you on the East Coast, at least, and for those of you on the West Coast, good morning. I'm seeing a lot of great talk in the chats here. We got folks from all around the country that have joined. My name is RJ Bianculi, and I'm the Critical Issue Conference co-chair. On behalf of the Critical Issues Conference Advisory Committee, we welcome you to the Art of Change in the wake of COVID-19. And yes, the topic, the Art of Change, was actually created when we started the conference planning in late 2019, and we did not know how fitting it would be. This is session 2 in the series, Supplier Perspectives, Insights on the Evolving Supply Chain, which seems to be changing so rapidly every day. When my CIC co-chair and friend Corey Silverstein and I set out to plan Critical Issues, we wanted to bring you exceptional content. Although CIC turned out a little differently, we believe the high-level critical content is exactly what we had hoped for and more. Additionally, one of our goals was to break the CIC attendance record. To say the least, it has been a record-breaking CIC that we are proud of, with over 300 attendees last week and another 300 plus attendee this week attendance, which is fabulous. Thank you for being a part of this record-breaking Critical Issues Conference. I do want to stop and say a big thank you to all of our sponsors. What would our event be without our generous sponsors? The answer is it wouldn't. These companies have stood by us in the SHFM family during these challenging times and stepped up to provide the resources that we need to deliver outstanding educational events like this one. Thank you so much. Normally at CIC, we would be able to connect with these sponsors face to face. While we are physically distant during this time, our connection isn't. So immediately following next week's final session of the CIC series, we have an opportunity for you to interact virtually with these sponsors from 2:15 to 3:15 p.m. The virtual exhibits take place right on the CIC website, so please note your email for further details. It's an exciting opportunity for you and for our sponsors. You will be able to view participating sponsors' products and innovations that you will need to prepare for the way forward. I know a lot of us are missing face-to-face time, so some sponsors will actually be available on video chat for virtual exhibits. You can simply click the Chat Now link on the sponsor's exhibit page and connect with that sponsor, as well as other interested attendees. I really encourage you to do this, as it's a great way to support our sponsors and connect with others in the industry. And I've also seen some of the great innovations, products, and services that our sponsors, vendors, suppliers have come up with and created during these very challenging times. And I have to tell you, they're really impressive. So you don't want to miss that because it will help your business. It will help you come up with new ideas for your business. It's going to be a very, very productive time. Before we jump into the session, I want to make sure that you're familiar with Zoom, the Zoom technologies we're using. I know many of you attended last week, but for those of you who didn't or need a quick overview, here's a couple of quick tips. If you're on your PC or on the app on your phone or iPad, you can find the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. There you can access our Q&A and the Q&A window function, which we'll be using. So you can type in any questions or comments that you may have. Also, you are muted, but don't let that stop you from asking questions. You could ask questions through the Q&A window right at the bottom. A lot of the people are utilizing the chat to say a virtual hello, which I've seen, which I think is fantastic. Last week, I actually was able to connect with some folks in the industry that I haven't spoken to in some time. It was really nice. You could private message. You could also message. Just make sure if you are sending a message to the group, click and then it's all panelists and attendees. Okay, so you can, if you want to send a message to everybody. Take a moment to greet each other by letting us know your name, company, and how far back you go with SHFM. If you're new to the SHFM family, welcome. I want to mention that there are also a few different view options. So you can use a side-by-side mode, full screen mode, and more. Whatever your preference is, it's flexible and there are options, so you can find the option that works best for you. If you're only connecting through dial or via telephone, we can hear you in spirit, but you can still ask questions. And the way you can ask questions is you can send an email to shfm@hqtrs.com. That's shfm@hqtrs.com. Lastly, this session, including the chat window, is being recorded, so it can be played on demand. It will be available shortly after the session on SHFM's COVID-19 resource page, which is fantastic. This page is a great resource for you to utilize as we emerge into the new normal, and it will continue to be updated, so please check back on that. We have some phenomenal speakers today in the second installment of our series, Supplier Perspectives, Insights on the Evolving Supply Chain. And to tell you more about this session and our speakers, it's my pleasure to introduce our session host, Bill Anderson. As Senior Vice President and Publisher of Foodservice Director, Bill leads the Foodservice Director media brand, magazine, website, e-newsletters, and meetings. Wow, that's a lot, Bill. Bill is also the conference director for the Menu Directions Conference at Winsight Media, now in its 18th year. Before entering the food service media, Bill started his food service career as a distributor sales rep with Fox River Foods outside of Chicago, one of my favorite cities. Bill is a member of AHF, NACUFS, and SHFM, and has served on the AHF's Industry Advisory Board. He is also a current member of Trinity Health System's FANS Advisory Council. Bill is a graduate of Carthage College with a bachelor's degree in business administration. Bill, I'm passing it over to you.
Great, thank you, RJ. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'd like to welcome to today's panelists, Dennis Hogan, Chief Executive Officer with Foodbuy, Greg Keller, Senior Vice President of Sales and Chief Customer Officer with Sysco, and Thomas McQuillan, Vice President, Corporate Strategy and Culture and Sustainability with Baldor Specialty Foods Incorporated. But before we get started to tee up this afternoon and what we're going to share with this exciting series, series number 2, before we hear from our first speaker, last week at SHFM's Critical Issues Conference, or Series 1, discussed operations. Susie and Harrison shared with us what's happening now and what operations in the future might look like when we all return to whatever is going to be our new normal. This week, Series 2 is exploring, as RJ mentioned, evolving food supply chain. What is happening with our food and non-food supply? As we know, everything and everyone is connected. We cannot do this alone. We're not living in our own silos. So whether we liked economics back when we were in college or thought econ was a foreign language, we're all getting a crash course in economics and how supply chains work. Operations cannot function without a consistent food and non-food supply. People cannot be employed without the facility and then the food and non-food supply chain feeding into those operations. It is the proverbial ankle bones connected to the shin bones connected to the knee bone, and so on. I hope I got that childhood song right. It's been a long time since I sang it. But anyway, figuring out what's next. What used to be accomplished was done by historical data, whether it was month-over-month figures, year-over-year figures. We were always able to do constant comparisons. And then we would sprinkle in something new, something optimistic about our new ideas that we were ready to launch. Well, now we have so many unknowns. Today's speakers will help us share what is happening now in their areas of expertise and help us to have a better handle on what is next, what could be next. They are our SMEs, our subject matter experts. Something I've lived by since I heard this a long time ago. When I went through my first recession, being employed out of college, I was complaining about change and thought how detrimental it is and how defeating it is. And I was reminded that if we don't like change, we're going to hate irrelevant. And now to take us to our first economics class, whether we're going to or not, please welcome Dennis Hogan. Let me give you a little bit background about Dennis. Dennis was appointed Chief Executive Officer for Foodbuy in May 2018, returning to the United States after serving for 4 years as a Managing Director for Compass Group, United Kingdom and Ireland. As the Managing Director, he oversaw the UK's largest food services firm, directing and implementing strategic growth initiatives for the region. Prior to his international assignment in 2009, Dennis was promoted to CEO for Canteen Vending Services, where he was instrumental in positioning Canteen as an industry leader in the vending business. In 2002, Dennis was selected to join the Compass Group North America Officer Board after serving as Senior Vice President of Finance for 3 years. As the Senior Vice President of Finance for 3 years, Dennis helped to facilitate the acquisition of Foodbuy, which would bring him full circle to his role as CEO. Dennis first joined Compass Group in 1996 as a Senior Manager of Strategic Planning. Dennis earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Economics from James Madison University and also received a Master's degree in Finance from the University of Illinois. Thank you for being with us today, Dennis. I'll hand this over to you.
Bill, appreciate it, and sorry for the long-winded background on me. Anyway, listen, I think most of you are familiar with Foodbuy. You know, we're the procurement arm for Compass Group, but we're not just the procurement arm for Compass Group. We also buy for several other businesses, whether they're hospital systems, restaurant chains, hotels, and casinos. And the amount of spend that we have and that we manage, it's about $24 billion. I think it gives us some unique insight and perspective into what's happening in the supply chain. And what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about what's happened the last couple of months since COVID-19 has hit. So if we move to the next slide, and I think the first thing we noticed right away was there was just an urgent need to source products like chemicals and PPE. So these would be things like hand sanitizers or surface disinfectants, and certainly masks and disposable gloves. And I think to really understand what was going on in the supply chain, I think it's helpful if we simply break out the supply and demand elements of this. So let's do that quickly. So from a supply standpoint, all of a sudden we were being asked to source products that historically we never had before. And often this required finding new suppliers. So we had to get QA involved to vet and make sure that we were meeting the safety standards. But not only were we finding new suppliers, but we suddenly were faced with significant price increases, shortages, and then very material lead times because a lot of this was being secured out of Asia. So that gives you a picture on the supply side. On the demand side, it was equally challenging because we really didn't have a good, accurate indicator of how much velocity would be in these products. So for example, we would be using cleaning chemicals maybe once a month, or a case would be sufficient. Suddenly the demand would go up, or the usage by 10 or 50 times. And in addition, we were servicing, and still are, a lot of healthcare business. And so our clients, particularly on the acute care side, at the hospitals, often they would be providing masks for our colleagues, and so we didn't have to source for that. So you had a lot of complexity trying to match up supply and demand. And then just to make things a little bit more challenging, a lot of the products as they came in were not really suitable for us to ship directly to the units. So we had to, in effect, do our own redistribution sometimes, using our internal warehouses to pick and pack and then ship directly to the unit. So that was kind of the framework that we were faced with. If we move to the next slide, as we start moving now into the reopening phase, there are emerging trends that I think are very relevant, but they have direct impacts on the supply chain. So for example, from the food service standpoint, I think we're looking at certainly reduction, if not elimination, of things like self-service stations, salad bars, coffee bars, and so forth. Yet we're seeing an increased demand in grab-and-go offerings, individually wrapped items. And in fact, anything that is pre-prepared, we think there's going to be a significant demand for. And that's not just for safety concerns. It's also because with lower volumes, we realize there's going to be pressure on managing costs and reducing labor. And so anything we can have that's pre-prepared is going to make a difference in that side. Now, let's talk a little bit about cleaning and sanitation practices, because those are important, particularly from a supply chain standpoint. So if you think about surface disinfectants, you've got some that are like, say, the wipes that are very efficient, they're easy to use, but they're also very costly. On the flip side, we can take some chemicals, dilute it with water, It doesn't have a quick kill rate. It might be 10 minutes, yet the cost of using that relative to the wipes is very significantly lower. And so what we're trying to do is understand what the demand is going to be for each of these different elements and what practices will be. And because we've got to go back to our suppliers and our distribution partners and make sure that they're ramping up production and allowing us to have those products in distribution, so when the units order, it's available. And then clearly, we all know we'll see more use of mobile ordering, but there are supply chain ramifications for that as well, because with mobile ordering, we're going to be talking about pickup or possibly even delivery, and containers need to be fit for purpose for those types of activities. So again, different impacts on the supply chain, and we've got to make sure that our suppliers and distributors are ready for that. So if we go to the next slide, just going to talk about a couple other items. You'll see again, PPE, disposable gloves. Again, do our units need nitrile gloves, or do they need the traditional vinyl gloves? And then I think all of us are probably thinking about cutlery and plastic cutlery. I think there's going to be a significant increase in demand for wrapped cutlery, but yet we also think a lot of our units are still going to use the dispensed cutlery. So again, trying to understand those different elements. Moving on to the next slide. I thought I'd just take a quick deep dive on masks. I think for better or for worse, all of us have probably become somewhat more proficient in our understanding of masks. And from a supply chain standpoint, it's incredibly important. So if I categorize the masks and look at them and say, okay, you've got your respiratory masks, which are really good for protecting people, especially if they're in highly vulnerable areas, healthcare and so forth. Then you've got the 3-ply masks or the surgical masks, which are disposable, but we definitely see a demand for that. And then also the cloth masks, which are washable or reusable. And I think we've got to work closely with our clients and understand, especially as B&I starts opening, what are their expectations going to be in terms of these masks, and what are they looking for us to do? And again, we've got to tie that into the supply chain with a heavy lead time and so forth to make that work. We can move on to the next slide. This next slide, I think, sort of captures that previous comment that I made. There's a little bullet there at the end, the 3 C's of sourcing, and you can see the words clients, community, and compass. And we've sort of dubbed our approach to sourcing fall under this category. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is we've got to make sure that we're meeting the standards of the local community and the local health departments. So we see the governor and the states having their own approach in terms of safety. We need to know what's happening locally. We also need to understand our clients' expectations. And then, of course, Compass, we have our own standards for our employees to ensure they're safe. So in a nutshell, that's sort of been our approach to sourcing. Now, carry on the next slide. Now, from a perspective of working with our partners, you all have the pleasure very shortly to hear Greg Keller from Sysco. And we've worked closely with Greg and his team on a couple of things. One is making sure all these new products are on our order guides and we're able to get them off to the units. And then secondly, with the tremendous drop with the shelter-in-place orders, so many of our units closing, there was a lot of excess inventory that we've had to work closely with Sysco, sort of proprietary inventory to Compass, that we've worked very closely with them to move to other parts of the country so that we don't end up with a lot of slow and dead product. And fortunately, they've worked great with us, and touch wood, we've been able to avoid having any material write-offs. So as an organization, go to the next slide. As an organization, we've had to rapidly change the way that we work. We've created task force groups. We've got to prioritize every single day what's got to happen that day to make sure that units are getting what they need. And fundamentally, we've had to ramp up our communication. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you an example of that communication approach we've had. And that communication has really been in the form of daily bulletins that are updated regularly. And one area you might find interesting is kind of a supplier update, and particularly around what's happening with proteins. And proteins, clearly the meat processing industry has had some closures. That's put some pressure on fresh proteins. And so we've got to make sure we work with distribution, manufacturing, so that they know that we need to have adequate frozen inventory in case these fresh proteins closures happen and the units need to shift their ordering patterns. So that's just a snapshot of what's happened. So that pretty much wraps up for me. I think there's one more slide, but I think I'll just summarize as follows. I think that our approach is to be as quick and fast-paced and nimble as we can be so that we ensure our units are still providing great service, they're still providing great food, but all of it in a safe environment. And with that, over to you, Greg. Thank you. Or perhaps back to Bill.
Thank you, Dennis. Great insights. I think you summarized the number one word we might have learned in COVID-19, and that's pivot. What an amazing job you guys have done pivoting and looking for new supplies and figuring out what has been sourced. And with that, something that's going to affect that is our first poll question. And I know everybody's done these so far with Zoom and doing the polls, and these are kind of fun. And we were thinking, the supply chain is affected by demand and what can be supplied. So again, it's the proverbial chicken and egg. So our first poll question has to deal with, for example, yesterday, the University of Notre Dame announced that they are opening their fall semester for students on campus August 10th, and they're going to close by Thanksgiving. So they're going to give it a shot. They're going to open up the campus, see how it goes. It's going to be an abbreviated schedule. So with that, this is what our poll question is looking at. So what percentage of your corporate clients, meaning employees at the corporate offices that you all serve, do you anticipate will return to the office in the next 60 days, or also known as phase one? So we'll wait for your responses. We'll give you a minute on that. Okay. All right. Should I do the wind down clock here? 10, 9, 8, 7. So Tony, are you able to share the results, or is it too early yet? Okay. So 48% of you thought it would be 20 to 30% of your, as you can see here, of your staff and client employees will be returning, followed by 10% or less in 24%. So it looks like this is going to take a while to settle out. So again, the reason why we're showing all these different phases around the country. So thank you everybody for taking that first poll. So we're happy to share those results with you. And so now, for our second presenter, our second panelist, I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker, Greg Keller. Greg has a focus on driving Sysco's sales strategy and initiatives. He began his food service career at Sigma, a wholly owned subsidiary of Sysco, in 2000, and held various sales leadership positions until 2008, when he was promoted to president of the Sigma network. In 2010, Greg assumed the role of Vice President Corporate Business Development for Sysco. And then in 2011, he became Vice President of Contract Sales, where he managed the national account sales team responsible for Sysco's travel and leisure and restaurant segments. In 2013, Greg became Vice President, Chain Restaurants for Sysco, where he had the responsibility for chain restaurant business across Sysco. In 2018, he took an expanded role as Vice President, Sysco National Restaurants, and the president of Sigma. And now in early 2019, Greg was promoted to Senior Vice President, National Sales, while continuing to lead the Sigma network. Most recently, in March 2020, he was named Senior Vice President of Sales and Chief Customer Officer for Sysco. Thank you for being with us today, Greg. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So thanks everyone for the opportunity to be with all of you today. I have to admit, there's some positives out of working from home, but it was great to put a dress shirt on today. And again, great to be with all of you. Dennis, thank you for the insight. I think I'm going to take a little bit different point of view. Dennis gave us great perspective as to how Compass and Foodbuy are thinking about the business, and many of you are probably thinking about the business in the same way. And frankly, it's hard to imagine a more appropriate title than supply chain resilience and agility when considering what all of us have faced over the last couple of months. I'd say in most ways, regardless of the role that each of us plays in food service, we've probably been faced with a very similar chain of events. And I think at times it takes an extraordinary event to realize the interdependencies that we have on one another. And a session like we're having today, I think, is a great opportunity for us to really think about those interdependencies. And there's no doubt in my mind that COVID-19 has reminded us of that reliance. And I think it gives us a great opportunity to think about how we manage the business differently. So I wanted to start by giving just a little bit of context as to how the events of COVID-19 impacted Sysco, and most likely many of our very strong competitors, and how Sysco's responded to that. I think it's relevant to give you some context there, just so we can think about how we best work together in the future. So I'd like to start off by saying, so when you think of COVID-19 and when it started in early March, that is typically a very high volume time in food service in general. Certainly a high volume time for Sysco when you think about the snowbirds in the South, the markets up north starting to free up with better weather, spring break, sports and entertainment starting to really accelerate. It's typically a very high volume time for us. And therefore, it's typically a very high inventory time for us in our operating divisions. And so you can imagine the rapid drop in demand that Sysco realized as the events of COVID-19 transpired. We had gone from maybe our highest volume period of the year to, in some instances, a drop of 70 to 80% in demand in many of our locations. And that realization, based on quick decisions made by many of the food service segments, many of those that many of you are managing today, sustained a drop in volume that we anticipated would last for an extended duration. Especially higher education, the decisions that were made there insinuated that was probably a drop in volume that was here to stay. Sports and entertainment, the impact on B&I. With the realization that we were probably faced with an extended period of time with the drop in volume, we had to respond like many of you had to respond. And so we focused our attention in three key areas. We focused our attention in cost out, knowing that there was likely a new reality. We focused on taking variable cost out of our business. We had to take a very targeted approach on inventory. Dennis mentioned the focus on perishable inventory, and inventory that sat in the warehouses, that there was a tremendous amount of exposure for our customers, a tremendous amount of exposure for Sysco. And so when we think about cost out, a tremendous focus on how do we find other avenues for this inventory, which frankly led us to finding new ways of selling products. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. Also, many of you supported what was a big endeavor for us, and that was adjusting the days of our operation. So understanding that the volume would be diminished, we reduced the number of days that we were making deliveries. We also asked for flexibility from a routing perspective, knowing that volume was going to fluctuate and therefore we wouldn't necessarily know the new reality. And it was important for us to have the ability to fluctuate or manage our daily routing based on the volume that we would realize. Capturing volume was also really important. What were some of the ways that we could capture volume outside of our traditional network? So we've been opportunistic about doing that in retail to meet demand in the retail segment, and frankly, lack of supply, especially early on. And it also gave us an opportunity to put some of our Sysco associates to work. Healthcare volume was strong. In addition to that, we partnered with local, state, and federal agencies to find opportunities for community feeding. We did a lot of great work with many of you, including our friends at Compass Foodbuy, on really meeting this demand for community feeding. And lastly, as Dennis mentioned, the environment is changing. So we've been very focused on those who continue to operate their business. How can we help them capture increased demand, whether that's in to-go containers, pop-up shops focused on retail, takeout offerings. This new environment has created different ways of capturing opportunity. And then lastly, the third area of focus here, and when we talk about the agility that we need in the supply chain, we were focused on our snapback. So how do we prepare for the business to snap back? As we think about snapback, we understand that the biggest area of focus to support our customers is the resilience and availability of inventory. There are multiple factors that have made inventory planning one of the most challenging outcomes of COVID-19. Obviously, there have been disruptions in supply. There have been significant fluctuations in demand. As many of you know, not everyone has been impacted in the same way. Some businesses are thriving. Some channels or segments that we service are performing at different levels than others. And all of these factors have added complexity to ensuring that we have the right products at the right levels of inventory in our warehouses. In addition, as Dennis mentioned, the product needs to be able to operate in this environment have significantly changed. So items like grab and go, different packaging needs, really thinking about what does this new environment look like? So to address all of these dynamics, Sysco is very focused on enhancing and capturing better information about the inventory across our network. We focused on improved communication with our operators. Dennis mentioned, the need for better communication about what's going on with supply. We play a role in that. So we've been very focused on that. We've been focused at the corporate level, in addition to the operators in the field, in terms of what's going on with supply and what is being done about that area of challenge. And lastly, we recognize that the level of collaboration with our customers and suppliers will be more important than ever as we look to operate and thrive in a post-COVID environment. We're striving for resilience, but also have to be nimble, agile as we adjust to these new norms. So we do think that supply agility can be enabled by less complexity and fewer repetitive SKUs. We believe this is a great opportunity for all of us to think and partner differently when it comes to developing that future inventory and what a Sysco warehouse will look like. This is an opportunity for us to reset and truly drive efficiency in the supply chain by focusing on SKU synergies and SKU reduction. I know all of you will find this hard to believe, but we do think that customers will benefit from entering into deep contractual relationships with a primary distributor. We think having multiple distributors diminishes the ability to have agility, and it's easier to manage via one partner versus managing with multiple touch points. The term joint business planning has been used over the last several years, but let's face it, sometimes it's harder to pivot when the business is operating at a high level. With the reduced demand, this is a great opportunity for us all to think about how do we joint business plan and truly change the game. We can bring the business back in a more efficient manner. The product demands have obviously significantly changed. We have certainly seen the need for demand, or the increased demand in PPE. However, the demand has been a little inconsistent at this point. We know that we're all trying to find access to PPE. Therefore, sometimes it comes from the distributor, sometimes it comes from other options. And so aligning on what the needs are for the operators around all PPE items will be really important as we stabilize and continue to work together in that area. So Sysco's ability, we're very confident in our ability to put these items long-term and meet the needs of our customers. We anticipate many aspects of the PPE being the new norm, as Dennis talked about in his presentation. We're super focused on preparing for the snapback. We continue to prepare for a potential wave 2 based on what we have learned in wave 1. We think we will be much better positioned to withstand a wave 2 should we face that unfortunate occurrence. We also believe that manufacturer collaboration, a continued focus on food and associate safety, and corporate responsibility are keys as we enter the next phase of this new operating environment. This is an opportunity for to leverage this crisis that we've all faced. Let's not waste the impact of COVID-19, and let's look for ways that we can change the way that we partner together, drive efficiencies in the supply chain. How can we partner together to avoid going back to the exact same way of partnering that we did in the past? And we are looking forward to having those conversations with all of you. So in summary, Sysco is more focused on being nimble and agile and enhancing rigor in our logic when it comes to effectively managing inventory. We have realized through this pandemic that that's an area of opportunity for us. We understand that the product needs of all of you will be evolving, and we're invested in managing that evolution. We've learned that investing in enhanced data management tools and increased collaboration with suppliers and customers, let's get all of us in the same room, because that's critical to enabling this transformation. Lastly, while the last couple of months have certainly presented all of us with opportunities that we faced for the first time, Sysco is truly excited about what we've learned, and we think that this opportunity to exit the pandemic as a stronger and more agile business partner for our customers is certainly there to be taken. I will turn it back to you, Bill.
Oh, thank you, Greg. So appreciate your insights and you've done the other buzzwords we've heard. Besides pivoting, you've shown Sysco's flexibility and agility. So all the words that we never used as much before until we hit COVID-19, right? And thank you for your community outreach and feeding people. It's so helpful. So now we want to move on to our second poll question. So let's do this one quickly for sake of time. So last week we talked about what operators looked at, what they were always looking for, whether it was fresh, sustainable, farm to table, and now that a lot of that has changed. So what our question now is, what are your greatest supply chain concerns for the next 6 months? We've heard from Greg, we've heard from Dennis about what's happening out there. Now we'd love to hear from you. And let's answer this question quickly so we can get with Thomas McQuillan next and share his perspectives. All right. So Tony, is that enough time? We can. Okay, here we go. Thank you. What's your greatest supply? Number one continues to, number one, single-use disposables, followed by hand sanitizers and disinfectants. Interesting new technology. Boy, love to learn more about new technology and how that's going to help us out. So I think that's exciting. Seems like technology leads us out of so many different challenges that we face in our business over the years, whether it's been a recession or anything else we've dealt with. So now I'd like to go on to our third panelist that we have this afternoon. And let me get to, where did I put Thomas? Thomas is here. So this afternoon, our third panelist is Thomas McQuillan, Corporate Strategy and Corporate Sustainability with Baldor Specialty Foods. Thomas is a transformational executive with 30 plus years of successful business leadership experience and demonstrated a skill for turning around underperforming organizations and spearheading acquisition and business integration initiatives. His strong convictions and relentless drive and business acumen have enabled him to inspire personnel, lead organization in propelling profits and achieving dramatic growth. In 2015, Thomas joined Baldor Specialty Foods, Inc., where he spearheaded the Sparsies, scraps spelled backwards, initiative to reduce food waste throughout the company and significantly exceeded sales budgets. A year later, he assumed the role of Director of Food Service Sales and Sustainability, delivering world-class customer service and the highest quality produce and specialty food items on time and complete is Thomas's #1 priority. In 2018, he was promoted to Vice President, Strategy, Culture, and Sustainability. Thomas is tasked with creating a company-wide strategic plan, which includes its vision for the future. Thank you for being with us today, Thomas. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's funny when I hear you talk about Vice President of Strategy, boy, the strategy was to change the strategy over the last 2 months, and boy, have we. For the audience's perspective, I'll just tell you a little bit about Baldor, since many of you might not know much about our business. We are a regional distributor and food production company. We distribute food out of 3 locations on the eastern seaboard. We have our headquarters is in the Bronx, New York, and then we have a facility in Boston and one in DC. Pre-COVID, we were 70% food service distribution, 15% wholesale, 15% retail. The wholesale distribution food ended up in, by and large, in food service establishments. So you could say that 85% of our business, the large majority of it, went away on March 14th. I don't want to repeat things that we've heard Greg and Dennis talk about, but I'll mention that for us, because we are 70% produce distribution, that supply chain is really very complicated in the sense that it's very hard to stop fresh produce from doing anything but rotting. And so what we have in the warehouse in any given time is maybe 3 to 4 days of inventory. We always have about 5 days of inventory on the road. And then behind that are purchase orders at our farm partners and grower shippers, where they're assembling the orders to be shipped. So in any given time, we've made a commitment to at least 2 weeks of inventory. So an issue like COVID does not give you an opportunity to look forward and say, hey, restaurants are going to close on March 14th. Let's slow this down. Or better yet, what could we do with food service product if we did shut down restaurants? When I think back to the beginning of March, we understood we had something very serious happening, but I don't think we were aware of how serious an impact this would have on our business. Fortunately for Baldor, we pivoted, as the second point indicates, to B2C, which makes up now about 50% of our sales. B2C for us means taking the food products that we would normally distribute out to food service and retail and sell that to customers directly. The challenge there for us was we had to eliminate all of the food service format product and bring in retail ready B2C product. And that was very complicated in that, first of all, we work with certain farm partners who weren't accustomed to creating, in many instances, those retail ready packs. So that had to be established. We had to create the codes on our system so that customers would be able to order those products. We had to educate the B2C customers about pack size if they were going to choose a traditional food service product and how much product they'd actually be receiving. So really the whole business, in a sense, was turned on its head. And one thing I'll talk a little bit about was how we were able to move a lot of this food service product that we had in our possession and had on its way to Baldor. We wound up donating over 2,000 pallets of produce over around a 4-week period. And while that was a great thing to do, and we're proud that we were able to accomplish that and get that food into the bellies of the food insecure, a lot of restaurants, as they were closing, also had a lot of food to distribute. So that represented a lot of challenges for us to be able to move that food. But we were able to do that, and we discarded very little food. You heard Bill mention that I oversee the sustainability initiatives at Baldor. I often am asked the question, how does sustainability fit into sort of the new normal around post-COVID? And I'm proud to say that the standard operating procedures that we put in place here at Baldor to manage food are all still being respected. And essentially what that means is in our food production facility, which we call Fresh Cuts, where we process about 1,500,000 pounds of produce, we turn a carrot into a carrot stick, for example. What happens to the peel? What happens to the top, et cetera? 100% of that food product since November 2016 has been captured and sent over to a food production company, a pet food production company in Secaucus, New Jersey, to create a poultry feed pellet. We've continued to do that during this change, and 100% of that food remains still to this day is captured and turned into animal feed. So we've diverted from landfill about 25 million pounds of food from November 2016 to date. And I'm just so happy to see that that continues. And then company-wide, any post-consumer food, pre-COVID, post-COVID, is captured and converted into soil by creating compost with another partner. And the reason why I think that's an important thing to mention to this group is we need to have our eye on sustainable solutions now, as well as before. That doesn't change. When you think about all the disposables that are making it to landfill, we should not be taking a valuable asset called food and doing anything other than eating it, providing it to our animals to create future animal proteins, or creating energy and or our future soil system from that food. So I'd really encourage this organization to get behind full food usage. You don't hear me ever mention the W word when it comes to food, because food needs to be used. And again, as we think about all of these products that we're going to be sending to landfill, these contaminated products, why would we commingle those with food, food that can create our future soil system and make us healthy? So keep that in mind. Another thing I just wanted to mention, I didn't hear either of the panelists talk about things like credit during this time period. You know, with the restaurants closing, by and large, it really creates an issue in terms of cash flow, or could potentially do that. And one of the things that I started working on about a month ago here at Baldor is helping our finance team oversee the way we manage the amount of debt that's out in the street with our restaurant partners. And a thought I'd like to share with the group is, think about reaching out to your client base to collect money as a sales opportunity. I'm very much involved with our biggest customers to say, look, you know, we have some indebtedness out there. Can we create a plan to both bring that down while we begin to sell you again as you open? Maybe all the payments for current invoices can be applied to the old. We don't want the debt to increase, but we want to bring it current. Become part of the solution for your customer. They're under a lot of stress. But the worst thing you could do is encourage that customer to find a new partner in this era. They're afraid, they're scared, they don't know how you're going to respond to their unwillingness or inability to pay their debts. So I would encourage you to think about how we do that. And I think it requires a very unique collaboration between our accounts receivable and finance teams and the sales team and the marketing team, quite frankly, to work together to help people understand that your organization is a solution for them in these difficult times. And I'm very pleased to report that the restaurant scene throughout our sort of delivery range, which is Portland, Maine to Richmond, Virginia, are starting to come alive. And we see a really nice, steady increase in business day over day by about 2%. So it's going to take us a long time to get back to where we need to be as a company. But what's exciting is it is coming back, and you need to be that solution for the customer to help them grow their business back where it was before. And then the last point I'd like to make before we open up for questions is, you know, you have to think about your organization as a living, breathing organism. That's the way I think about Baldor. We are so inclined as people to want business to be like it was yesterday. We want our relationships with everyone in our life, including our customers, to be exactly what we want them to be. But we have to stop for a second and think about the customer. What are their needs? What are their fears? How can we empower them to be successful and be recognized as that tool that gave them the opportunity to come out of this and to be successful? And I'll just quickly tell you a story of a vegan restaurant that who was very afraid to reopen. And I sort of coached them through what I thought the menu could look like. They used to offer 50 different items. They're now offering 5. They're doing at-home delivery and takeout. And the owner called me just yesterday and said, you know, just you coaching me, telling me I can do it, giving me ideas on how to keep everyone in my organization and my customers safe, gave me the courage to do that. And their AR balance has reduced by $8,000 in about 3 weeks. Things are getting current. She's feeling empowered. She's going to open up 2 additional stores in the coming weeks. So that is the value I believe we have to bring to the table for our customer base. And I really hope that you get creative during this time and find success in doing that. So thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Great insights that you were able to share and how you were able to pivot your business as well. And thank you for bringing up the whole credit issue. As we know that's a high priority for everyone that's going to keep the wheels going here. And now it's question and answer time. And I see we've got some questions already coming in. And so if you've got questions, we hope to get to them as many as we can. So please type them in at the bottom of your screen. You see the Q&A button, and we'll get to them. So so the questions we already have in, I'd like to start with Dennis. Dennis, the border with Mexico was closed as we've had border challenges with COVID-19 precaution. What do you see as the effect of the supply items we routinely purchase from south of the border, like avocados, or maybe even from Canada or other countries? What other supplies could be impacted?
I mean, you know, I can only speak from what we've seen, Bill, and it's been very little. We have very few suppliers in Mexico. We have a couple, which we actually recently added in just as part of the PPE side. So for us, that has had no impact.
Got it. Thank you. We've got another question here for Greg. How will you keep operators informed about supply challenges on those items, which we were talking about, meat proteins, dairy, produce, paper supplies? How will they depend on reduced menus and facility needs? How far out can you forecast any of these issues?
Thanks, Bill. And so I think, you know, we have attempted to do just that, similar to what Dennis outlined. We've created a weekly communication that we do send to the corporate officers, giving insight as to what we're seeing in terms of supply availability and any potential challenges by category. So, you know, I think that we will continue to emphasize that, giving weekly updates. It's obviously a pretty dynamic environment. You know, I know the proteins are a big question today. We are seeing some relief there, but you know, I think that we have to find the right balance between giving good visibility as to what we are seeing, so that the operators can make good decisions about what they offer on their menus, and at the same time, you know, market by market, things can vary. So we're trying to find that right balance. So not sure who asked the question, but certainly would be open to making sure that they have visibility to what the supply side looks like in our weekly communication.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Thomas, I think the next question is a good one for you. What products do you think will be difficult to source for this summer and leading into the fall? Any shortages, any challenges that are on your list?
It's such a great question. You know, if you had asked me this question a year ago, I could have given you 5 or 6 items that we were having a hard time sourcing. But in this environment, it really, as Dennis said, we really haven't had that difficult a time sourcing product. One of the things that I think is interesting to mention here is that the grower shippers, the farmers who we work with, are protected by the PACA laws. I don't want to get into PACA, but they basically, their fear going forward is, hey, if we grow something, will you buy it? You know, we have very strong relationships with those farmers, and they know whatever we buy, we're paying for. So we're going to be very careful what we bring in to make sure we can move it. The pain point is going to be convincing the farmers to plant certain vegetables, knowing that there will be a market for them down the road. And that's a topic, that's an area where we spend a lot of time with them. But no one has the crystal ball to understand, you know, will food service be back at 70% come October, November, where they should be planting those vegetables now? So it's a lot about communication and collaboration and support and a little bit of risk, quite frankly, around what we will need. But to date, we've been doing really well in terms of being able to supply the products that we need.
Got it. Thank you. Geez, there's so many good questions coming in. A great question here. Let's go with this one. Greg, if we could go back to you, how do you anticipate the industry balancing the desire for more prepackaged goods with the need not to lose the ground we have gained with using sustainable products, sustainable packages? I think you were talking about the environment earlier, as Thomas was. What can you share with us on that?
Yeah, and Dennis might have a perspective on this too. I know they do a lot of work around this. So it's going to be a fine balancing act. I know that you know, our merchandising team, this is something that they're certainly taking into account because we have put a lot of emphasis on sustainable products from a packaging standpoint over the last several years, and this will be a disruptor to that. I don't think that we've totally figured it out in terms of what our strategy will be there. And I do think that it'll be pretty dynamic over the months to come in terms of what the real needs are from an operator's perspective. We're definitely seeing this, the grab and go packaging here over the next several months, which obviously will have a different impact on the sustainable products. So more to come on that. I don't know, Dennis, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you pointed out, or I don't know if you mentioned, Bill, but a lot of the questions coming in are in and around single-use plastic. So it's great to hear that remains at the top of the list for a lot of people. And I think, certainly encouraged by the CO2 emission reduction. Maybe it's been one of the silver linings in this whole, COVID crisis. And I think that we can't assume that, all the great progress we've made in terms of single-use plastics is just going to go out the window. And I think a lot of things are going to happen. I think that there's going to become more information in all aspects of transmissibility with the virus and understanding, are we overreacting to a degree with a reliance on single-use plastics? I think we're going to have more information and a better understanding. I think, and I think we would all be remiss to think that that's going to go away. At Foodbuy and Compass Group, we've had a chance to work with a lot of our suppliers, particularly on the beverage side, where they are committed to trying to move the needle and help us in that regard. And I think it is making a difference. And I think that we're still committed to moving in that direction. And I think we've just got to realize that this window that exists where single use is going to take off is not sustainable. I also think you're going to get government intervention. I think they're going to have to do something, or we're going to be just in a really poor place. So, and then let's not rule out innovation. And those suppliers that can deliver innovation here are going to be able to be the ones, because there's clearly, this still remains high on the agenda, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be getting their products to the consumers that are looking for that green solution even in these times.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Our next question is for Thomas regarding produce. Should we be steering our food service units to shift from fresh to IQF veggies to offset any overstock in freezers until farmers can meet the fresh demand?
Please don't. We know that COVID does very well as a disease for those who are suffer from respiratory issues, those who have poor diets, people suffering from diabetes 1, for example. We know that a lot of the deaths are related to people that in particular have diabetes 1. One of the things that I'm asked a lot about here is to help with donated product and to build boxes for the food insecure. And we're doing a lot of that kind of work here. And I could basically say word for word when somebody says to me, hey, can you build a box? And I'll say, what would you like in it? They'll say peanut butter, jelly, pasta sauce, and pasta, dried beans. And it's the same thing every time. And I mentioned to them that, the food insecure who are receiving these boxes are really tired of getting the same food. Can we put a head of romaine lettuce and put some interesting vegetables and explain how to cook them, make it a little bit exciting, plus diversify the nutritional value of the food they're eating? To answer the question, we need to eat more produce, not less. The farmers there's plenty of produce out there to purchase. And I think that we should be consuming and selling more fresh than IQF, certainly during this time, to keep people healthy.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you. RJ, do we have time for one more question?
I think we could get one more, then I'll close it up.
Okay, great, thank you. Our final question, many clients would like to increase their use of local and hyper-local suppliers like we were just talking about. How will the vetting and Q&A process change in order to be able to get these suppliers into purchasing systems quickly when you may not be able to do the physical site inspections due to COVID restrictions? Boy, I think that's open to any one of you three to cover that.
Well, this is Thomas. So we do a lot of business. Actually, Compass is our largest customer. We've been encouraged by them over the last 6 or 7 years to really up the number local farms with whom we do business. And we have done that. And there are times when we're 25% of our products being sold are local. And you think, wow, you're in the Bronx. How is that possible? We really, because of that commitment, have really helped build back, to a large extent, the infrastructure of the local farmers here. And so a lot of those relationships are built. They're in place. We're excited about supporting them over the next several months as the local products come through. So people can buy, at least on the East Coast with us, with confidence that those products will be available. And, so there's already a large number of farms to choose product from. And as others enter the arena or are large enough or meet our criteria to do business, we will send people to do the evaluation to determine if they can be partners. I mean, one thing I'll mention about Baldor, we're 2,200 employees here, and we move boxes. So we have been here through this COVID. I've been at the office every day. A lot of our team are working from home on the sales side, but the operations team needs to be here. So we will be careful and protect ourselves, but we will continue to grow our business and partner going forward with new farms.
Great. Thank you, guys. I so appreciate all of your input, and thanks to everybody for all of your questions. What a great session. Thank you so much. And I'd like to turn it back to RJ.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and I tell you, it was a fantastic session. Thank you, Dennis, Greg, and Thomas. To recap, and I'm going to leave everybody with a quick note, whether you're a manufacturer or distributor, operator, or client liaison, a couple of highlights I want to just reemphasize. Manufacturers and distributors, are you diversifying your portfolios? How are you pivoting into different channels? What are you offering streamlined SKUs, which are becoming more and more of a challenge? Like I'm in the toilet paper industry. We used to make 6 or 7 SKUs. Now we've streamlined it into 2 or 3. It improves turns. It streamlines offerings. It makes things easier. That's very important. Operators and end users, and Greg said this, working closer than ever with your vendors in collaboration and communication is extremely important, especially with the tightening in the supply chains on a lot of different product categories. You will need to be proactive, not reactive. And there should be a sense of urgency with that on specific categories. That was a great point. I also going to mention the B2C market. And Tom had mentioned that Baldor's now transitioned 50% of their business into B2C. Well, as a manufacturer, distributor, or if you're a provider of a service, how are you going to continue to pivot into that market? That's going to be a long-lasting market. As an operator, how are you going to capture those employees that are now going to be working from home, perhaps permanently, whatever percentage that may be? And as a client liaison, how are you going to service those colleagues to make them feel a part of the culture, of that at-work culture? These are all things I think, need to think about, and we need to execute as an industry and as a food service family. So I want to thank you all for those points. They were really, I believe, well taken by our attendees. So before we sign off, I just want to say another special thank you to our wonderful sponsors who without, we could not have done this today. Following the event, you're going to receive a survey. It only takes a few moments, but we really appreciate the honest, and I mean that honest feedback, good or bad, indifferent. We want to know how we can continue to improve the content and the value that we're bringing you. And I just want to lastly remind everybody that next week is the final session, and it's called Preparing for the New Normal. And it's all about people, and we know how important our people are. So that's going to be on Wednesday, May 27th, as well as the time afterward for our sponsor exhibit. It's our first virtual sponsor exhibit. I know it means a lot to the sponsors to have a strong attendance and engagement. So please make some time to continue to support our family, our SHFM family through this. And it really is going to be a great way to connect. And it's going to be a great way to close out the CIC series. So I want to thank everyone again. I want to thank FSA Management, Rob Gordon, Corey Silverstein. Thank you all and most importantly, the advisory committee who's done such a fabulous job pivoting 3 times to make this all work. So we look forward to next week's final installment of CIC, and I hope everybody is safe and have a wonderful rest of the week.